Hi everyone, this is not an action movie show. You can tell by the fact that I dressed up for the occasion. I'm Carlos Alcazar, and with me as always is Manyninja, who conveniently reappeared mere moments after the previous video.
I'm not sure what you're talking about. I was just hanging out. I just came back in after taking care of nice robot bear who trashed my couch. The couch I had just purchased. I'd have a couch back there. But no. Stupid bear. Robot bear. But enough about that.
Lots of paperwork at the Ninja office.
Which I could have done on a couch. Comfy couch. It swayed. Was swayed.
The lament of the couch is not actually the reason we are here. We are here because the Ninja has promised to amuse me. And by that I mean he has some issues that he would like to address and get off his chest while I possibly guffaw in the background. Please, continue.
Alright. So I've taken, aside from fighting robot bears, and continuing my attempt to do a flawless run of silly games such as Wrath of the Black Matra for what I'm affectionately referring to the never-ending ninja block on Retro Ninja Gaming, and in general, because when you're ninja every day is ninja block. Namely, I have to take a quick pause to kind of look at some other comings and goings, which includes right now something that's kind of been going around on YouTube for the past, I'd say, week or so, give or take. Being not necessarily affecting so much my channel, since I don't tend to cover a lot of first-party Nintendo stuff, but realistically, Nintendo's policies up to this point have effectively been for their first-party stuff. If you show it, we are probably going to be throwing a copyright notice at you, or copyright ID content match. Which is noticeable because during, at least on my version of the channel, for kind of a quick bit for the Super Retro Trio, which was probably one of the few things where I did use content, even though it was very old content, being the original Super Mario, or the original Super Nintendo release of the Super Mario Kart, every second of the music, or every second where Super Mario Kart was present, the music was flagged for it. Every single moment of it. Which is ridiculous. But, okay, that was then. And now they rolled out the Nintendo Creator Program, which is supposed to be kind of a meeting point of sorts between YouTube creators that use first-party content in their videos and Nintendo themselves. What really turned out was more along the lines of Nintendo finding ways like, well, we know everyone likes to show this there, and technically, well, people could understand and see how it could kind of be used as an avenue to help advertise the product a bit by showing it in a variety where millions of people can see it. But no, we want to make sure we get our cut of it, no matter what, whether it's trying to sell a product or just even talking about a product loosely. And we basically want to control every bit of the message too.
So, no, can I throw out a bit of a, not a rebuttal, but just throw a 2 cents in there?
Yeah, certainly. On paper it sounds right, but Carlos, go ahead and show it.
So I have noted a little bit about it. It doesn't really affect anything I really do on my channel. Even the odd video game thing that I'm going to do is only going to briefly touch on Nintendo things. Especially nothing like first-party Nintendo. There won't be any of the Mario Karts and things like that. Great games, but in the long run, it's not worth the effort. It's not worth the issue. I think this is kind of systemic of a bigger thing. Nintendo for a long time has kind of gotten away from what really worked for them in the first place, and they've kind of been banking on the intellectual properties, the IPs that they already have, to such a degree that they've become the possessive boyfriend. Really, is basically the best way to put it. Protective to a psychotic degree of it, because that's really what they have. Nintendo has a lot of money. Let's not argue otherwise. They make a ton of money on handhelds. The 3DS, the 3D XL. Is it 3DS XL or?
Well, technically, they have a bunch of models of the 3DS. The original 3DS, the 3DS XL. It's just in a matter of days, the new 3DS will be coming out.
That's the one I was referring to. What is that one called?
The latest unit that's going to be coming out, and technically is out in Japan already, is the new 3DS, which is basically a version of the 3DS, depending on what size, because they do have an XL format of it, which is technically the only one that will be appearing in North America. That basically improves the control scheme. the control scheme overall, adding an extra C stick, so basically, more akin to more traditional controls, which have two analog sticks.
Yeah, for sure. No, you don't need to go into all the specs.
Yeah.
You got the idea.
Yeah.
But the point that I was trying to make was that Nintendo has a bit of a stranglehold on the portable market. So when it comes to like the portable handhelds, even though I still like my PSP, which is old technology at this point, a lot of people that play with the PSP do so to mod it. That's really what they think to do with it, because you can play emulators on it and all that. That's wonderful. I liked it just, for the portability of it. I preferred kind of the way that Sony was doing their business. The Vita is interesting. It's still not at a price point that I would particularly want it, but it's very interesting. I like it. I never got into, even in the days when it came out, I am of the vintage that I could have had the Game Boy. It never really drew me. I preferred the Game Gear, which, Sega, hardware-wise, died off. I preferred, once it became viable, I preferred the PSP. When I used to read old issues of GamePro, in my mind, the Nomad was a much cooler system than anything they were doing with the Game Boy, only because you could play the real Genesis games. Now, mind you, that thing would have sucked out battery like nothing else, because the Game Gear sucked on battery. The reality is the color screen wasn't going to hold up. But eventually they came up with the Game Boy Color, all the other ones. Eventually they started progressing until eventually they reached the current ones. So they've got that stranglehold on that market, which is good for them because that allows them to make a lot of money to keep the rest of the hardware going. And those first-party titles are so important to Nintendo simply because as a main console manufacturer, they're consistently now a number 3. It's Sony, Microsoft in this generation, and I'm not going to derail your rant about the Nintendo creators thing, but for me, the most interesting thing still to be decided is what this console generation is going to mean for the future console generations.
That's an entirely different rant for another day in this case, because there's a lot that can be broken down on that one.
Yeah. I'm not gonna go any more of that. But what I'm saying is that Nintendo has a stake in trying to, if you want to play devil's advocate for Nintendo on this, Nintendo has a stake on doing everything they can. They're grabbing at the handful of things that they've still got. They've still got Mario. They've still got Legend of Zelda. They've still got Metroid, Smash Brothers. These are the Mario Kart. More Mario, and then when we're done with a side of Mario. But these things are what they cling on to desperately. I think in the effort to try to protect this intellectual property to a psychotic degree, they consistently go too far and forget that if you turn this audience away from you, there's nothing left. Who's going to buy the Mario games if you consistently try to piss off everybody that does, any business with you?
Yes. Yeah, technically, in terms of not only the general console, but Nintendo's main set of business as a whole, these are literally conversations that I'd need an entire separate rant for, and honestly want to do a bit more research just to double-check some features. But in terms of this one, this is kind of a particular microcosm which I find jaw-droppingly insane regarding the Nintendo Creators Program, and once I start mentioning some of the details, it'll start making sense of why it's just kind of hard to understand this and how they expect people to accept this and see it as a good thing, which clearly people have not. So, alright. The general premise of the Nintendo Creator Program, in a nutshell, is Nintendo is agreeing basically to have it, or give an option so people can sign up to the program, either registering single videos that involve first-party Nintendo content, or registering their channel in there. And the way it'll work is those channels there, after a review process, which could take a couple of days or more once I'm going to explain, any kind of AdSense money or any kind of ad revenue from that, you as the person who's running the channel will, if it's the individual video, get 60% of that. Nintendo will keep 40%. As if it's a whole channel worth, then Nintendo will give you 70% of it and keep 30%. Of course, this relies on a few things. One, you have to register through your Google Plus ID, which, okay, if you have a YouTube account, that's probably already set up. Two, you have to have an active and verified PayPal account. So if you had other means to be paid through your AdSense or whatever that, now you're being forced to use PayPal, which realistically, a lot of people still have PayPal. It is a very well-used service, but it's still kind of an odd thing. And the next part is kind of the logistical mess that this whole thing is created, because, for one, you have to have a waiting period of, they say, around 3 days in order to take care of this. But realistically, once a video launches, it's within the first couple of days that realistically you're going to get most of your money out of. And while there'll be definitely a bunch of hits, especially if it's based off a more popular channel after that, it's those first 3 days you're missing a lot of potential funds from there. Unless you already had your entire channel verified, and even then there's still going to be a delay. So you're losing out funds there. Two, there's actually a pretty small list of games that are approved for this program. You'll have to forgive me a second. I'm just kind of, I have the list here, or I have the page that will help me find the list of titles that are authorized for this program. And you have things like for the Wii U, you have Game & Mario, or Game & Wario, New Super Luigi U, New Super Mario Bros. U, Nintendo Land. Who's going to do a video on Nintendo Land? That's not exactly a title that's going to attract viewers, let's be honest. Wii Fit U.
In March 2015, on the Manyninja's YouTube channel, Nintendo Land.
No. Wii Fit U, that's kind of an odd pick. Super Mario 3D World, Legend of Zelda Wind Waker HD, Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, Pikmin 3, and Mario Kart 8. I have actually just listed, at least at this point in time when we're recording this video, all the supported titles for the Nintendo Wii U. That is a very small list. Note that this does not have anything that, let's be honest, is going to be a major thing. None of the F-Zero titles. Smash Bros. For that system, the latest Smash Bros. Entry is mysteriously missing from that list because, let's be honest, that would be a definite thing that draws in viewers. Why is that missing? And just about everything else is missing from this list. It's a very small list. Downloadable content for Wii U, Dr. Luigi, Wii Sports Club, Wii Street U powered by Google, Wii U Panorama View, Animal Crossing Plaza, NES Remix. Very short, very odd list. There are a number of titles that doesn't make any sense. 3DS titles. Without having to list all of them, basically, most of them are Mario-based titles. Realistically, let's be honest, that's not a surprise. First-party thing, you usually think Mario anyway. But it's still a pretty small list, and you have things like Tamagotchi Life, which that doesn't seem like something that would be a great video together. New Art Academy is on this list. I've never even heard of that title.
You could be the first one on YouTube to review Art Academy. Think about it.
You got things like Swap Note under the downloadable version of that. There's a lot of things just listed here that don't make any sense. There's a list of
the thing is, I get what you're saying, but they do actually make sense. Nintendo doesn't actually want to give you anything you want. They really would rather you didn't put anything up.
Yeah.
Now, we can argue about the intelligence of that decision making, the short-sightedness, because in effect, well done let's plays, reviews, commentary, in effect, when people are talking about your product, it gets your product out there. Considering, as I said, they're kind of the number 3 console when it comes to like consoles. The people are not barging down the door to buy the Wii U. This has been a struggle since the Nintendo 64. The Nintendo 64 was kind of the beginning of the decline. Nintendo, as I said, is still making tons of money. That's not the issue. They've developed a dominant position in handhelds, no doubt. But at the same time, they are struggling and scratching and clawing to hold on to these IPs that they have. But at the same time, when they're in doing so, Let's Plays draw viewers. Viewers watch personalities play the game. The game, in many cases, is secondary to the personality of the reviewer. A good reviewer or a good Let's Player can play almost any game and make it entertaining, realistically. It's the personality that drives the views. But by the same token, if the game is actually interesting, the person playing it clearly is enjoying themselves, and it's interesting, you watch that, maybe, you might be inclined to go, you know, I kind of would like to try this game out myself. A lot of times when I'm looking at, I don't buy a million games, but when I do, I go to YouTube. I look for people playing the game and see a little bit about it. I want to see what it looks like. I want to see what it sounds like. I'd like to see, you know, maybe a little bit about a couple of the modes if there's something that catches my eye. I'm more likely to take that. That's the modern version of the reviews. Like in the old Game Pros when they used to show like previews and things and review things and have their little rating system. You can argue about how, you know, maybe rating systems were bought. You could pay some money to have the score bumped a little bit. But at the same time, you can pay somebody to say really nice things about your game in a YouTube video. And some companies do, and some YouTubers take money that way. But if nobody is really in a position to play any of the things because you pull all the videos, you refuse to allow them to show any of the videos, and you basically prevent them from doing it, eventually they're going to be like, you know what? It's not worth the trouble. I'm going to go play another game.
Exactly. This is exactly, well, you kind of skipped the point, but this is exactly one of the arguments I wanted to make. Because I was just listing some of the recent stuff. What I didn't mention is the list is a little retentive to the point that it not only goes through there and not even like just stops at the, like, let's just say stops at the Wii. No, it actually goes, we go to the Nintendo DS setup there. We talk GameCube games on this, having a limited list there. We have Nintendo 64 games, that's a very small list of the library. Game Boy Advance. We have Game Boy games, Super Nintendo, and NES titles that we have restricted. These are the only games that are proved to work with this program. Anything else won't be allowed. You won't be able to get anything for that, and we'll consider it a violation.
Can I give you a comparison that might help a little bit on this?
Please.
Okay.
Please.
Let's have a little chat. A little history lesson for the kids. For those of you that might be interested. In the night, you know, throughout the history of music, when it became commercially available, you could get LPs and then later cassettes and, you know, 8-tracks, cassettes, CDs. Throughout that time, there was a time period, depending on, let's face it, YouTube has a very young demographic. So if any of you happen to randomly catch this video and you're not in your mid-20s, 30s, and older, you might know about the time when CDs... It wasn't rare for a musician to sell 10 million copies of an album. 5 million copies, 10 million copies, even 15 or 20 million copies of an album. It wasn't rare because if you really wanted it, that was the way you heard it outside of the radio. The internet existed, you know, into the late 90s and in the early 2000s. It existed, but it took time to download. Then you have your Napsters and your peer-to-peer downloading things. The thing that happened with Napster, and I had the chance to watch a documentary that talked about it, is that Napster created the opening in the industry. People could get the music for free. Funny thing, if you go into today, we're years past that now. Napster was in the late 90s, where it really was at its peak. We're in the year 2015. In the year 2015, more people buy legal copies from things like iTunes online, or they listen to them streaming through Spotify. Why did this happen? Because eventually the music industry, so rather than just one label, the music industry as a whole was forced, kicking and screaming, to accept it because the profits started to drop. Because at first, they fought anything. Napster, you know, some of the Napster guys tried to come up with a way of, you know, making deals with the music things to provide this service so that people could share and trade music or buy music legitimately from the labels. The labels fought this tooth and nail. It wasn't until Steve Jobs came out and offered them a cut, but also said, you've already lost. So you either accept it and take a cut, or everyone will just download it for free and you get nothing. But the music industry fought it. And to a lot of people at the time, it looked strange. It's like, but you're fighting a losing battle. If people really want it, they're going to do it. The technology's already out there. It's done. The cat's out of the bag. The reason why I bring this up, to bring it back to what we're talking about, Nintendo is fighting the technological battle they've already lost. If people really, really, really want to share like they can go in and they can try to flag every video. And, you know, there are good scanners that can do that. They can come up with this program that most people aren't going to be interested in because the terms are too, you know, restrictive. They're silly. What's that?
Draconian in nature.
Oh, I was hoping you'd say draconian. There you go. No, the thing is, it's silly. They've fought it too hard, but it really is similar to what the music industry did in the late 90s, where they started just suing people. They started suing anybody that they thought they could get away with. Lawsuits, left, right, and center, trying to stem the tide. But it's like putting your finger in the dam with the one hole as a bunch of other holes and cracks are starting to go right across the other side. You can't stop it. At the same time, in Nintendo's standpoint, they could have a bigger problem on their hands, in that is, if you restrict everything enough, it's out of sight, out of mind. Smash Brothers and all those games have followings. Mario Kart and all those have followings. Mario still has a thing, even though he's been in 87 million games at this point. There's still a fan, you know, a fan base, a following, but at some point you're going to exhaust that because you're going to, you know, you're going to drive those people. The fact that you don't really come up with IPs anymore, the fact that you keep harping back to the same characters over and over and over again and trying to just come up with another angle to show the same thing, and the fact that you really won't let people have any fun with it. A lot of other games, independent games, thrive on YouTube because they embrace it. They give codes to YouTube reviewers because it's free advertising. It's better that somebody knows what our game is. We can get it out there. Nintendo is feeling in its mind that it's like, well, we're Nintendo, everybody knows who we are, which is true today. But there was a time that Atari was the gaming world. Things change. There was a time where Sega Genesis was, Sega as a whole was a major player in gaming. They still exist, but they're peripheral. They're a software manufacturer with some games, but they're not a major player anymore.
It's a heavily reduced presence, especially considering some issues they've been having as of late.
Yeah,
they're not exactly doing too well.
But at the peak of their powers, they were an 800-pound gorilla, and people felt like it was. Sega was everywhere. It was Sega and Nintendo. And for in the late 70s and early 80s, Atari owned the land. ColecoVision and all these other systems existed, but Atari owned the land until they didn't. Until they got full of themselves and started to do things that went. History and everything, in technology and everything else, is full of companies that felt that they were bigger than the whole thing and thought that they could do whatever they wanted, until eventually the public said, no, you can't.
Yeah, no, that's technically, if you want to actually think about it, for some of the Sega's early successes, it was actually partially due to people having a knee-jerk reaction to what Nintendo was doing and not liking it, jumping ship. I'm trying to remember, I can't remember what was the name of that one. There's an exact developer. One second, I'm just going to quickly look up the name because I have it on the tip of my tongue, but I don't remember what the name exactly is. But basically, it's the developer that Namco. Namco is the name I'm looking for right now. Where they were having a pretty decent deal originally with Nintendo during the early days, but as they were moving and upgrading these things and hoping to continue their relationship, the actual basically Nintendo basically kind of stonewalled them as like, these are our rules as we're playing them now. It's like, if you don't like it, leave it. And so they decided, seeing the competition, Sega with the Mega Drive there, decided, it's like, you know what, if this is how we're going to handle things, we're taking our business over here, and we are actually giving a big push at the start of the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive Lifeline to help put content in there and push their advertising and push their products so people will go towards their services.
Yeah, but the thing is that's the point, though. Nintendo and Arrogance isn't new. This isn't the beginning. I said, we're not going to do a whole history of video gaming thing here. And you know what? I'm not even going to claim that everything I'll say here in the next moment is 100%, like chronologically to the letter. But I have a reasonable grasp of it as I remember it, and also I lived a good chunk of that time. You have to remember that when the Sega Genesis was fighting with the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo, that was kind of the peak of the video game powers. They were, having their little Cold War fighting each other. But the thing was, the Super Nintendo was a very worthy successor to the Nintendo, so they had moved into that level. When the next level was supposed to come, the N64 was supposed to be the next obvious, next generation console and the whole thing. But you have to remember, around the time that came out was very close to around the time that the PlayStation came out and the Saturn came out. And you kind of, within a couple of years, you started moving away from cartridges and towards CDs. And at that point, go ahead.
I'm sorry, but you actually you seem to have left out the most important part about the PlayStation. Do you know who accidentally helped birth the PlayStation?
I do. I'm aware. I was getting to that.
Okay.
Hang on for a second.
All right.
Settle down, Ninja. Settle down. Get to some more paperwork. All right. So anyway, as these guys are coming out, the wave is shifting towards optical media. Not because, they hate cartridges, but because it's a lot easier it's cheaper to manufacture CDs and then later DVDs and then later Blu-rays on optical media. You can have more space, you can do, full motion video, you can do more things. The technology wasn't refined. If you go back and play some PlayStation era games, the polygons, the horror, the polygons, some decent games came out of it, but, not visually amazing, but it's a step towards where we ended up getting. But at the time, Nintendo stood steadfast in its cartridges. And to Manyninja's point, realistically, the PlayStation came about as almost a revenge tactic from Sony when they got screwed over in what was supposed to be, I believe, correct me if I'm mistaken, I believe it was supposed to be a CD attachment to the Super Nintendo.
I'm not sure a CD attachment to the Super Nintendo, but
I thought it was like their version of the Sega CD, but for the Super Nintendo.
I'm not sure.
Let me look that up.
I don't remember that exact part, but effectively the general gist of the story is that it was actually part of a cooperative effort by Sony and Nintendo in order to develop a CD-based. I'm not sure if it was an add-on or a full-fledged kind of sequel.
It was. I got it.
It was an add-on?
It was a Super NES CD.
Okay. So basically, it's the next step in advancement there, to which Nintendo showed this thing too early at an E3 without approval from their partners who helped them develop the thing. The whole deal ended up falling through, but Sony basically kept the technology and reworked a few things to eventually develop what we know was the PlayStation. So Nintendo accidentally helped birth their biggest competition since, that effectively well, after a few nuances here and there, are basically one of the two that are ruling the roost right now.
Yeah, and a little piece that I'll add in, because I did read that previously and I did want to mention it as well. Specifically, did you, other than the fact it didn't work out, the other reason why Sony had such an issue with what ended up happening with the CD project?
I might, but I just don't recall off the top of my head, so please proceed.
The key was that they were working. They had been developing this for years. Nintendo, again, had kind of, in its arrogance, done things. But one of the big things it did was, in the end, because of licensing disagreements with Sony and things like that, because you're always going to have your arguments when you're trying to develop a piece of technology between two companies that develop hardware, they ended up partnering with Philips, basically Sony's arch nemesis.
Oh, yes, I remember that.
So now the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Or in this case, that was Philips' mindset. So they went and wedged themselves in between, did the partnership with Nintendo. Nothing came of it, but you pissed off Sony. And now Sony's like, all right then, we learned a thing or three while we were working on this console with you guys. So we learned a thing or three about this console business. Maybe we want to throw our hat in the ring. And if you can think about it, where we are today in relation to where the PlayStation is to where Nintendo and their console is, really, the seeds were planted back in the Super Nintendo era. That's how far back it goes, where Nintendo pushed their luck just a little too far with Sony and got them into the game. And Sony's introduction into the game encouraged Microsoft to give it its own crack at it when the time came. The opportunity had to present itself, but Microsoft looks at everything. They can see the situation. You know, they saw it developing, and in the back of their mind, they kind of filed it away for later. And when the opportunity came up, now you have another competitor. So Sega dropped out, but you got yourself two new competitors that you effectively created.
Yep. Fun times. And, of course, Nintendo, because they didn't do anything with the CD stuff, decided to stick around. It's like, we're going to stick around with a proprietary cart system, which was much more limited in nature. And therefore, the limited nature, and we control the production of these carts. So we still are generally in approval of everything, just as we were in the Super Nintendo and Nintendo days, which obviously, between that and everything else, and an underpowered system, helped to scare off third parties back then, which really really helped. If the trend hadn't already been started, it kind of cemented the trend from there on out.
Well, the thing is,
software, hardware.
There was no trend up until the Nintendo 64. The Super Nintendo had a lot of third-party support. It has a gigantic game library with a ton of studios doing work on it. Lots of good games, lots of mediocre games, lots of terrible games. But the point is, lots of games. The entire Nintendo 64 game library is under 300 cartridges. Nintendo was 700, almost 800, and Super Nintendo was in that range, I think, as well. Tons. To put a contrast in comparison, the most successful game console of all time really was the PlayStation 2. And I think in North America it had over 2,000 games. That's third-party support. There's a ton of shitty games in 2000. A ton. But the point is, you had, along with that, a ton of good games. You had the combination. It was like the old Nintendo. I promise you, if I go in and search through the library of the original Nintendo game, we're going to find a crap ton of bad games. Almost unplayable, garbage, but we're also going to find some classics. We're going to find some kind of, okay, this isn't bad. The point is, having that much support means you're going to get a mixed bag. But at least you had those options. By the Nintendo 64, 300 games, less than 300 games.
Especially depending on which market you're at.
Yeah.
No, it was a marginalized library, and between that, the cartridge systems, and the GameCube using its own proprietary disc system, and basically, by limiting themselves as the way they did and limiting who could get in there, and then the actual hardware being lacking, of course the competition is going to look much better. Just because it's like we can actually manufacture discs on our own or whatever the software or hardware we need, and we have more power to do with what we want. Technically, Final Fantasy VII, people probably heard of the game, had an original indentation meant for the N64, but because the thing was much too underpowered, I believe in a kind of an off-the-cuff comment about that one the developers mentioned, they need like over 10 carts in order to try to fit the game content in there.
Yeah, probably.
They decided Squaresoft just decided it's like this thing is just too weak to run the thing. We're making it for the PlayStation instead, and the rest writes itself. Everyone already knows the history about that.
Yeah, but that's the bottom line: is that they were really stubborn, and then by the time we're not going to get into the whole history of Nintendo. That's going to take way too long. But the short version, Nintendo 64 was the beginning of missteps in that regard. Nintendo's arrogance, though, goes back decades. But it became more pronounced by the time you get to the N64, by the time you get to the GameCube. Because at that point, they were using optical media, but they were using a miniature version of optical media. So you'd have games where you can get it on one disc, one normal size disc. But if you get it on GameCube, you can have it on 2 discs, which is tremendously convenient, no doubt.
Yeah, it was basically to protect their thing or protect who can put the thing out there. Basically the same limiting features or ideas that they had from before. And
so wait, what you're saying is that Nintendo enacted a policy as their own policy, which in effect restricts what people can do with the thing that they have.
I would say Nintendo enacted that policy as far back as the NES days, to some degree, for not only people who are the actual end users, but for people who are producing things. Because, just to mention, technically, back in the NES days, or Famicom days, which you prefer, they had a limit, companies had a limit of how many games per year they could release onto that system. Which is why you have things like Ultra Games and similar companies, which were basically just kind of shell companies, which were like bigger companies, in this case Konami, using other names in order to get their games out. By basically using these front companies in order to get around that thing.
Indeed. But the point is that, so that's all I'm saying in regards to that point. That would be my counter to you. Nintendo's been doing this for a while. This isn't new. This is just the newest version. Trying to control the YouTube thing, trying to control how many videos, people can make of it, restricting them to game titles that they probably have no interest in actually doing any recordings of. When you went through that list, realistically, like, Wii Fit, a lot of those games is like, yeah, somebody could make a video about them, but they probably won't, just because it's not really that interesting. And even if you do it, then you have to give Nintendo a cut of your modest profits, because realistically, YouTube AdSense revenue isn't really off the charts unless you have a lot of viewers, a lot of subscribers, and people watch your entire video from front to end and click on a lot of the ads. Unless you get all that, Nintendo is taking cents out of cents.
So basically, it's generally Nonces Policy. Just there's a lot of workaround. Quite frankly, they don't have the infrastructure to cover that. Within the first week, they were already sending a message apologizing because the people who were interested in applying overwhelmed their ability to actually process it, which is not a surprise. It means technically you're waiting even more time, which actually means more money out of your pocket there. And when people were addressing the issue, what if my channel that I registered, it has a lot of Nintendo content, but it has non-Nintendo content in it? Does that mean you're taking funds out of those views or ads as well? The best way they had to respond to it in their later updates is that after you applied your channel or registered your channel, you had a 72-hour period to delete any offending or non-applicable videos from your channel. So not that they would work around it or acknowledge that those are not applicable, we'll leave those alone. They were actually physically asking viewers or applicants, to delete those videos from their channel, making them strictly Nintendo channels. That was their answer.
You seem upset.
It's actually just borderline silly. And they figured that it's like this would help appease the thing. No, you're basically saying if you're going to use any of our stuff, it has to be strictly our stuff on channels there. It has to be strictly within this rigid miniature guideline here. Talking about products where we know you're not going to do videos on them. And realistically, the best way to respond to that is like, okay, if it's going to be this insanely restrictive, no, thank you, I'll play something else. Which is effectively shooting yourself in the foot.
That's the thing, though. I
sincerely don't understand. You're shooting yourself in the foot there. I understand. Sure, you want to control your message as much as possible.
They don't actually want you to make videos.
It's either they don't want videos or they want everything so filtered. This is our exact version of it. You're our effectively free PR extension without us having to do the video work, or we don't want you to do anything at all, which kind of makes it odd because people will obviously want to gravitate your product if it's a good product, but only if they talk about it. If they're not talking about it, then you're just making your job harder. Why? I don't understand.
Because they're Nintendo. The plumber has spoken.
That's why we talk about Taito titles here. You can't go wrong with Bob.
Indeed. But yeah, that's the thing. It goes back a long way. It doesn't really affect someone like myself, just because I'm not really going to touch a lot of those things. It's not. I don't think it's going to touch most people. I think most people are kind of used to Nintendo really being overbearing about trying to protect their intellectual property. I don't think the majority of people are really surprised by what happened. I think some are, but realistically, I don't think it's going to change that much in terms of what happens. I don't think there's that much direct Nintendo content now.
I would argue that realistically, in terms of their stuff, especially the first-party stuff, that's what they have going for it. Because otherwise, the library, well, this will be a kind of a different thing to argue for another day. In terms of this generation, of what's available in the libraries, I'd say there are more things on the Nintendo Wii U that I'd be interested in playing in than currently exist at the moment on either the PS4 or the Xbox One in terms of the library. But in general, they do so many asinine things and things that just don't make any sense. Like, all right, for one of our big advertised products, the latest edition of the Smash Brothers series, we're going to sell a specialized version of the game that comes with a special GameCube adapter for people that want to use the classic-style controller that they've had in the past and basically enjoy the hell out from previous iterations for the use for the newer system, but it's going to be sold in limited numbers. And in this case, as everyone learned later on, this adapter is literally only compatible with this one game. And that's it. There are adapters that are available, third-party adapters that let you use the same controllers for other titles as well, but the official Nintendo one is literally built to only work for this one game. And with their latest bit, which is basically we want to sell figurines now, they build these, or have their collection of amiibo figures, which, alright, we're going to basically sell a bunch of these little things, small little trinkets, like $12, $13 a pop.
You don't have to explain what the amiibos are. If they're watching this, they probably like video games.
Yeah, well, I'm just putting it out there just for those that not necessarily looking, that just happen to catch this thing. But basically, okay, we have the amiibos. We're selling these things at $12, $13 a pop. Basically, it's free money. It's give us the money. Only we're going to sell some of them in limited numbers per region, per specialty store. So if you don't get it from this specialty store or the Nintendo shop, you ain't getting it. And we literally restrict it in such a way that if you're trying to buy one through one of these means out of state, unless it's literally through the gray market, we will prevent that any way we can. We actually have proof of this, of preventing this sales any way we can, unless it's through the gray market.
The plumber has spoken.
Yeah, Big Mustache is protecting their set of way and their system as much as they can. And it's like, in this case, do you hate money? You have these things out there. People want to buy them in large enough numbers. They want to give you the thing. There's a big enough demand. They want to give you their money. You should take their money. Accept their money. They don't like money.
So when can we expect the relaunch of your site as a Nintendo-only platform?
You can expect that on the date of, in the month of March, in the year 2000XX.
Good job. But yeah, so I think that covers that, because the rest of it ends up being just a history of video games, and that would take a while. Anything else you'd like to get off your chest on that? Preferably without the full-scale history lesson. As a history major, I appreciate it, but I think the kids got it.
Yeah, no, in terms of the history thing, no. And even in terms of the just major stupidities of the Nintendo Creative Program, I think we've generally summed it up. If you want to take a look for yourself, the website is freely available at actually this address they gave for that is kind of silly there, like r.ncp.nintendo.net/ oh, that's the list for the whitelist. Yeah, Nintendo/net/guide. it's even silly to get into this damn thing. Oh, I forgot technically the last little note here is in terms of the payment scheme, of course you have to have PayPal, but you get paid after Nintendo gets paid their cut, which takes a while for them to get, and then it'll take you a while to get. Yeah, no, I think I'm about out of it for this thing. Burned myself out.
I look forward to your videos of you burning Mario in effigy.
No, I'll continue to play the games that I have here, but you won't exactly see me playing them on any recordings anytime soon. So unfortunately, we will have to save our Super Mario Kart death matches for off-air, because we can't show them on YouTube, of course.
And that's the lesson you all learn, kids.
That's the great tragedy.
No fun on the YouTubes. At least as far as Nintendo is concerned.
Big Mustache is watching.
Indeed.
And hating.
Apparently. Well, I thank you much for watching the Miscellaneous Stuff Show. We do these sporadically when the ninja gets riled up about something. And you can tell he's riled up when his face goes a little bit red, his eyes squint a little, and he goes into elaborate prose and deep explanations that probably weren't necessary.
But now, got that on his system, can calm down and play some more Tendo games. Unless, of course, I try to play more Wrath of the Black Magi, which will probably infuriate me even more so. But still, fun game.
Indeed. I thank you all once again. We will see you when the ninja gets frustrated about something, or when we have our... What is this, like? What is this, like the 8th console generation? 7th console generation? What is the number? I can't remember now.
I have no idea.
Whatever
This
goddamn generation is, at some point I want to have a discussion about this generation. PS4, Xbox One, and Wii U.
The short synopsis of that video is this generation is the sucks. Because it really is. It's a total disappointment, but we need to save that conversation for another day.
Indeed. So that's everything for us. Again, from Action Movie Show / miscellaneous stuff when we just ramble on show. Have yourselves a good one, and thanks for watching.
Take care, everybody.